The candidate this week is a data scientist, and this particular candidate was targeting a VP role at a big tech company. They're currently not a VP in their present company, but their present company is quite large. And so being a VP there means, well, just a little bit more than the target company that they're going to. So they're definitely looking to get a promotion in terms of title, but I would say in terms of scope and scale of their kind of job scope and responsibilities, it's kind of a wash between the two companies where they were targeting. The specific leadership principle that we are targeting today is earns trust. And the question that was asked was, tell me about a time that you had a piece of direct feedback, direct and negative feedback that you gave to a colleague. Now, there's two important parts to this particular question. One, that the content is direct, meaning it wasn't solicited, wasn't asked for, no one told you to do it, but you kind of saw a problem that was kind of an issue and you kind of went and solved it. There's a little bit of ownership in doing that, but how do you deliver that feedback? But two, that it was to a colleague. So not someone who works for you or who would in any way be confused about the chain of command and thinking like, oh, well, if this person's telling me this thing, I have to listen. But, a colleague, and certainly not up. So this is kind of a sideways piece of feedback that was being asked of this candidate. Things to look out for in this specific answer, and quite frankly, for any answer. One, is the feedback in fact direct and negative, right? A lot of times people will think that they're giving feedback like, hey, I think you could have done this better, or, hey, I have a problem with something that you're doing. But is it really negative? Is it really like hard feedback that the person may not be expecting or may not want to hear? A good example of this would be, listen, you're managing this team of engineers, and the problem that I have is you're slacking off on the commitments, not just to me, but to the team, and you're not managing them well enough. And what's happening is your engineers are talking to my engineers, and that lack of accountability is starting to bleed over into my team, and it's causing me the inability to then handle and manage my team. So we really need to get on the same page as far as how you're holding your team accountable for meeting their milestones and goals, because it's starting to bleed over to other parts of the organization, and it's really going to cause a lot of problems. That is what I would call negative and direct feedback, and that's something that someone definitely wouldn't want to hear. Whether or not it's true doesn't matter. It's a tough pill to kind of ingest, and so that's the kind of thing we're looking for here. The second thing that we're looking for, does the person who is the candidate, do they display empathy, right? Are they just coming out and saying, well, I told this person they suck and they need to understand that they suck? Okay, how did you deliver, right? Because the wake that comes off the back of the boat, that really has a lot to do with, how your message is going to be received. And so as an interviewer, I'm listening for, are you displaying EQ? Are you displaying a level of empathy that helps me understand how you actually deal with problems within your organization, specifically people that don't necessarily have to listen to you? How are you building or earning that trust with folks who are in your organization when you're trying to build the relationships and establish yourself as a leader who's got credibility, but at the same time doing the things that need to happen for the organization? And finally, within the context of the answer, right, is the candidate demonstrating to me that they lead with data, or in some way creating a situation that is kind of it would be hard to be misconstrued, right? If I'm a person receiving this feedback, are you coming to me and being objective in the feedback? Can I perceive it as being objective, or is it going to come across as highly emotional, maybe incendiary, and something that's quickly going to cause me as the recipient of that feedback to kind of shut it down or turn it off? As always, if you would like to support the channel or you're getting value out of these videos, please go ahead and like the video, put in a comment. I reply to all the comments I get, or you can visit interview@.com to partake of any of the services that we make available, from software sales to content sales, any number of things that we continue to expand the portfolio of goods and services that we make available to help you interview better. As always with these videos, I will play back the interview, the mock interview, in its entirety, and I will jump in from time to time with commentary. For this question, this is asking not about people that work for you or within your chain of command, but rather someone who is a peer within your org, right? So you share the same leader above, or a peer in another organization where you don't necessarily have kind of a shared leader, but someone who's more of a peer and less likely to be seeing you as a senior, or them seeing themselves as subordinated to you. And this question is specifically about how you give feedback, or types of feedback you give. So I'd like to talk about, in recency certainly helps here, a piece of direct but negative feedback that you recently gave to a colleague. What was it, and what was the feedback?
Great. Yeah, let me think of an example to share there. Yeah, I think one example is around our monthly business review. We have a a team that, helps pull together an initial draft for that. And then, each of the managers have an opportunity to, then I get to update it, I suppose, before the final version gets shared with our VP leadership team. And so, I had shared my feedback for the past few months, but I felt both the process wasn't conducive to us giving the best results, and also the way we were representing the business wasn't as impactful as it could be. And so, I met one-on-one with the individual who was compiling this, shared, some of the challenges I felt we were running into, both in terms of the the comprehensiveness of representing the organization, as well as the types of information that we were sharing and some of the consistent errors that I was seeing there as well. Shared, a process, essentially a solution that I thought could help in these cases. And that is something in the past 2 months I felt of the monthly business review, we're able to get to a much better place and keep a healthy working relationship there through the process as well.
Okay, straight from the jump. I want to reiterate and go back to, this is someone applying for a pretty senior role, right? VP level title within what we'll call large tech organizations. The level of detail in this answer is not good at all. And here's the problem. When you're interviewing for a job, you have to provide enough information to me, the interviewer, to process how you work, right? That is the job of a job interview, is to answer the question, can this candidate do this job at this company and likely exceed expectations? Let's just poke at this answer. There was someone who was organizing a monthly business review. Over several months, I gave feedback it wasn't good or conducive to representing the business. And I shared with them that feedback, and I thought we could do better. Some key questions not answered here. What was the timeline for deliverables? Over several months is kind of vague and strange. And why was a monthly business review? Was it a repeated process that was kind of failing over and over again? Was it one monthly review that we were planning out way in the future, and then that was going to become? So that's a little bit unclear. But what were the challenges? How was it not representing the business? What specifically were your, this is a really senior person. I would expect them to have this level of detail. My suspicions at this point in the interview, and we'll see how it evolves, but my suspicions at this point in the interview as an interviewer is they're kind of not trying to reveal too much information about the inner workings of their company. That's potentially one part of it. Or two, they might just be so I'm in my head around how this process works, and of course everybody understands this, but she's describing a process at a company that many people haven't ever worked at, and so they don't really understand what's the purpose of the monthly business review, who's the target customer for this monthly business review, what kind of metrics data are they reviewing, why were those important for the business, which role were they in at the time. There's just so many pieces of detail that are missing from this opening stanza that it's a little bit challenging as the interviewer, which is going to cause me to have to ask a bunch of questions for follow-on, which take away from the time that we could really focus on how do you work. How did this person respond to that feedback?
Yeah.
So it's really important to understand the question, this follow-up question. I will certainly get into details because I obviously have my notes from the interview, but this follow-up question is asked specifically to understand how self-aware is the candidate? How reflective are they on their process and what happened? Now, this question, in the absence of detail, which the candidate didn't really provide as far as what was wrong and to whom they were providing the feedback. Was it a senior person? Was it a colleague? She wasn't really clear, but we'll assume because of the way I asked the question that I said a colleague and someone who's a peer. But how did they respond? Are you self-aware enough to piece that apart? Because at the end of the day, again, I as the interviewer asking these questions, I want to understand how you work. And some of this is a fit, right? Will you fit in our organization? And if you're not self-aware enough to be able to tell me how the person received your feedback, it's well, gosh, how's this going to work at the more senior levels within our organization?
I think, there had been a lot of trust building leading up to that. So it was helpful to be able to work from a place, and from that place. So the person responded in a way kind of acknowledging that, the individual felt like, I had a best intent for the group. There was one case where, I had shared a couple proposals actually of the way we could run it, and one of them had less of an ownership role for that individual. Essentially, if we're continuing to make these corrections, do we want to just kind of crowdsource the inputs would be one way to solve it. And that individual expressed that, that's actually something that they're very passionate about, and that they do want to continue to take that central role, and preferred to, use the feedback to evolve their approach. And so, I was glad that they felt comfortable expressing that, and was happy to kind of support them to continue to take on that responsibility and build their role in that way.
There's a theme which is beginning to emerge within this answer. Now, I want to be very clear. This candidate is an excellent candidate. Very, very, very good. And the interview on the whole was very, very good. But there were some themes which emerged, and it was persistent throughout the interview and very evident in this answer that the candidate is remaining way too high level. The lack of detail is actually pretty astonishing given how smart this person is. If you saw their resume, you'd be like, oh my goodness, this person's a super genius, right? Super, super smart. And so it begs the question, is this because they're a hands-off leader? Are they aloof? Are they just kind of avoiding specifics because they're trying to avoid saying something that might be perceived the wrong way by someone interviewing them from outside the business? There's any number of reasons for that, and that, kind of some of the pokes at that occur in other questions, which is outside of this video. But in this specific instance, what was the feedback? What was broken? How would you have fixed it? In what time frame? Like, none of that is coming through, and so it's really hard to assess how exactly they're going about their process. Now, they indicated that the person was very passionate about this process and really wanted to get the work done, and that they were happy that they shared it with them. That all of that is good, but at this point, within the context of an earned trust question, I'm still trying to understand, how do they work? How aware are they of how their feedback is being received? And again, as a person who's listening to the story, man, it's really high level. So I'm left wondering, did you really give feedback? Like, if I'm the person on the other side of that feedback, what exactly did you tell them? Or did you say, oh, this isn't working? That's not actionable, right? And that's what's making this answer such a struggle for me as the interviewer.
Do you think they acted? Do you believe that they responded appropriately?
Yeah, I think that they acknowledged the issues that were there. So I felt like that it was internalized that way. And yeah, I think it's appropriate for folks to share, what their ultimately their passions and career paths are. I suppose if I felt like it was ultimately not aligned with the business, there'd be more of an issue. And I did bring this up because I thought that we weren't achieving the best business deliverable, but I have seen good commitment from them in the past couple of months and really wanting to improve it. And the number of corrections we've had to make has significantly reduced. So it feels like they've internalized it and are acting in a way that is getting us where we need to.
So I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. You can another kind of theme that's evolving is this is a reasonably high EQ leader. Like, they're listening to what's important to the person that they're delivering the feedback to. They're listening to the things that they're saying, and they're aware that the number of errors is kind of going down over time. So they're definitely leading with empathy. No question about that. That I don't want that missed in kind of the bigger uber issue of the lack of details. Is that this is clearly a leader who's paying attention to the people around them and understanding their needs and trying to figure out ways to connect with them and work with them.
And so what would you have done differently, or I guess as an adjustment, if they had not responded in that way? Perhaps they had responded in a less receptive way.
Yeah. I typically would, I might try just a different way of articulating it or explaining it. Again, trying to keep it objective, less personal, of like, try to kind of take people's names out of different approaches and just describe the approaches with labels that are more objective in that way. Like, for example, the rather than the finance approach versus the engineering approach, the kind of the forecast versus decompose, like something in that way, so people don't feel as much personal attachment to it. I have found that be effective in terms of being able to just further enumerate the argument. for example, in this case, it would be, well, here are the specific errors that we had, here are the the timeline in terms of the, the work back that was there to fix those. Here's the impact that it had. So I would still take another stab at that one-on-one. If it still wasn't working, then, I always want to first go to the individual for any feedback. But, there are some cases where then, it's something that I would need to discuss either with their manager, kind of other members that are involved in this process in the leadership team, if we're just not able to get traction. And then, that might be a scenario where, obviously authority of theirs that can be more direct, or, just to have other members, voicing their experience in the process. I might be able to share the feedback in a way that resonates further with this individual.
Okay. How do you like to receive feedback from folks of similar level, we'll say, kind of that same tier?
Yeah. I do appreciate if folks, can share, I suppose, one-on-one. It's helpful. I mean, if of course it happens in group settings as well for various items, but I think, being able to just kind of debrief more deeply one-on-one after a session. And yeah, I think any feedback, it can have that initial reaction or surprise because it's it's ultimately a blind spot. That's why the feedback occurred. Or, maybe it's not the first time you've heard it, but it can be a blind spot in some cases. But I am really grateful for the feedback. I would much rather someone share the feedback than think it and not share it with me. So I do really try to think about feedback as a gift and, identify something I can learn from it. So, I think it does accelerate my growth ultimately to hear that.
So here's the thing with this candidate, again, stating clearly that throughout the totality of the interview, this candidate's outstanding. But in this specific answer, way too high level, right? Way too high level as far as details of like how they approach the process, what specifically was the feedback, how are they communicating that to their colleague, like what was the level of interaction, et cetera. Like all of those things are definitely missing from this interview. But surprisingly, no data was actually shared by a data scientist, which is strange, right? So you're talking about this monthly business review, which presumably is about numbers, but there was no actual data being shared, which is just a very strange thing. A sense that I was getting throughout the interview was that the candidate was holding back, right? That they were either kind of trying to self-censor and not share too much, or maybe not reveal inner workings. Like there was a little bit of a hesitancy there, which I never actually asked the candidate this, but let's assume that that's true. And now I'm speaking to you as the viewer of this video. If you're worried that you're going to say something that's, call it material non-public information, right? Trade secrets. Yeah, clearly don't say that. But like revealing how companies work isn't, you have to be able to talk about how you work. You have to be able to talk about processes within your organization, even if it comes down to product development or marketing plans, whatever it is. But you have to be able to talk about it in a less vague way. Because when you are vague, you are creating a cognitive load on me, the interviewer, to try and pattern match against what you've done and then my experience set. And if you don't lay it out for me, like I'm a 6-year-old, right, and just kind of walk me through it, star format's great for this, linear progression through your story. If you're not doing that, unfortunately, when you're telling your story, as vague as you are telling your story, there's a film strip playing in your mind. And that film strip is specific to you. If I haven't worked at that company and we haven't had those shared experiences, I have no idea what that film strip looks like. So instead, it's my film strip starts playing and I start pattern matching against things that have occurred in my organizations and my experience, et cetera. And that's where that cognitive load of trying to do the pattern matching and trying to bring up experiences and think that it's too much for me, the interviewer, but also it's highly likely it leads to the wrong conclusions. So you have to ask yourself, is the self-editing and the self-censoring, are you doing it to the detriment of your answer such that you come across as aloof, extremely vague, or perhaps not even in the details enough to really warrant the position you're going for? And in this case, for such a senior level person, gosh, it really does bring into question a lot of challenges as far as like, are they going to be able to get the job done here? So with these videos, what I always like to do is at the end, I read to you the feedback that I would have read into the room had I been on the hiring loop. And for this candidate, for Ernst Trust, this answer block was at least a better showing for the candidate. There was a good level of empathy, led leadership in handling of a difficult situation, though what was less clear were the specifics of the issue. Once again, the answer block had elements which were way too high level and not providing nearly enough depth of field. Basically the same thing I've been saying throughout the interview. It's always interesting to read these back. I actually don't ever look at what I wrote in my assessment until we do this part of the video, so I don't kind of color the video. It's always interesting to see how on point I am throughout the video. But in this case, look, it's hard to make the case like, yeah, this is a strong hire when it's, yeah, I'm not really sure what the issue was. It sounds like there was a management business review that was going awry. Well, why was it going awry? I don't know. There was something with it wasn't representing the business the right way. How was it not representing the business the right way? I don't know. Was the data wrong? I don't know. Was it not focusing on the right metrics? I don't know. Was it not focusing on OKRs? I don't know. There's too many I don't knows, right? So if I'm asked in the room to defend this candidate, I can't do it, which is why I get back to how I talk about structuring your answers. If you like think about the FAQ format that I talk about, and I have a playlist that I'll link to at the end of this, but the FAQ format for how you work through your answers is what are the questions that matter, right? What was the problem? Why was this a problem? Who was the person, who was the colleague, and what was their relationship to you? What were they in control of? What was your specific feedback that you gave them? How did they receive that feedback? What were they willing to do to address that feedback or not? What was their pushback on your feedback? Do you agree with that? There's all of these questions that I, as an interviewer, did not get answers to. And one of two things is going to happen in an interview. Either A, I ask those hard questions and really dig in deep, and you're either prepared or not to talk about it, but you're forcing me to ask questions that you as the candidate should have presented of your own volition. Or two, I'm a bad interviewer. I don't ask those follow-up questions. I walk out of the room and I promptly forget about you because you're too high level, too vague, and I just think, this person can't work here, which is a disaster for you as the candidate. That is an unforced error that you shouldn't put yourself in the position of having. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you looking at my Stanley Cup final Colorado Avalanche shirt? It's pretty cool. Yes, I know. The Avs are awesome. Go Avs.